Forecast from the Old Farmer's Almanac, 22nd through the 31st. Snowy periods north, showers south, cold. That's the forecast for Arkansas, Tennessee, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, and also the Florida Panhandle. I think they got the snow right, just in the wrong spot. Hey everyone, I'm meteorologist Nathan Scott. Welcome to episode 6 of Weatherwise, where we'll be talking about the big winter snowstorm that's going to be lined up through the deep south. We'll explain why that's happening in the first place and what are the latest forecasts as of Monday afternoon. Also, we'll talk about an ensemble. You'll always hear about meteorologists using ensembles. What exactly is an ensemble? We'll break it down for you. And lastly, there's something happening in the night sky. You may have heard of the Planet Parade that takes place throughout the month of January. I'll let you know what to expect from that. So let's go ahead and start off with what's happening in the deep south. This is the current map as of Monday afternoon. We have winter storm warnings issued from South Texas through Houston into New Orleans, along the Florida Panhandle, as far south into North Florida as Gainesville. Now that is very impressive. This is a very rare event to happen in this part of the country. Record snow is certainly on the table with a large area of Texas stretching from Florida. And the reason it's so weird for Florida to see this type of situation is because you have water on both sides. You've got the Gulf of Mexico, of course, to the west, and then you have the Atlantic Ocean to the east. And when you have low pressure systems that make their way through the Gulf of Mexico, they typically bring in warm air from the Gulf, and therefore your precipitation falls in the form of rain. But they could see maybe some freezing rain or sleet into parts of North Florida and heavy snow lined up right along I-10. Let's take a look at the setup here. We can take this full if you want to. This is the weather pattern. Why are we not seeing snow here in the natural state? Well, you step outside, it's very dry. This air mass came straight from Siberia. It is a dense, cold, dry, massive air that has taken over the eastern half of the country, and this acts like a wall. So with this wall continuing to push its way down towards the deep south, that's blocking any moisture from this system that's developing into Texas. Now will swing its way through the Gulf of Mexico from moving very far to the north. There's going to be a sharp cutoff on where the precipitation happens and where you won't see anything at all. The big blue H is ruling the roost. That's pumping in the cold air, of course. That's what you need for winter weather. But at times, the big blue H is just too strong, and therefore the strong dry air pushes all the way down to the Gulf Coast in this rare occurrence. And you see the moisture trying to push its way in. But it's not only what we're looking at the surface, it's what's happening from the surface to about 5,000 feet above the surface, where the temperature profile changes. So yes, it may be snow for a little bit of the area, but there could also be some sleet that mixes in, just because there could be warm air that does make its way from the Gulf of Mexico into parts of the deep south. Like I said, this is a record event. The last time it snowed, I looked up all these dates from the National Weather Service. Beaumont, 2021, so not too long ago. Morgan City, 2017. New Orleans has not seen measurable snow, and that is at least 1/100th of an inch of snow is considered measurable since 2009. Baton Rouge, 2018. Gulfport, 2014. Pensacola, 2018. So they do see a little bit of snow, a dusting of snow, but to see potential of 2, 3, 4, 5 inches of snow in this part of the state of Florida, that's very impressive. And back in 1977, you may have remembered this, January 19th, there was a strong push of Arctic air, so strong that we had flurries in Miami. And they actually had a little bit of accumulating snow just to the north of Miami. There were snowflakes flying around Freeport, Bahamas. Now that is some crazy stuff. They're not going to see snow that far south with this round, Tampa, Orlando, or Miami, but Jacksonville hasn't seen a measurable amount of snow since 1989, and that's certainly a possibility. So this snow we're talking about is probably going to break some records, especially in New Orleans. If they do see more than 2.7 inches of snow, that would break the all-time record for winter snow totals ever since records happened back in the 1890s for the most part. There you see the last one was 1963, 1964. That winter season, overall snow total was 2.7 inches. Houston, no worries there because the record still is from 1895, 20 inches of snow. Lafayette, Louisiana, 4 inches of snow, also from the 1800s. And then Tallahassee, 2.8 inches of snow, set back in 1957 and also through 1958. That winter season, Jacksonville had a snow total between the years of 1898 and 1899 of almost 2 inches. Let's go over to Storm Track 11 now, because when it comes to winter weather forecasting, we're looking at different things. So many different possibilities with where the snow is going to set up, where's the ice going to be, where's the sleet going to be. So we'll just take a look at different weather models. This is for tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock. So you see the blue breaking out through Louisiana, Mississippi. That's according to the NAM 3 kilometer, but we'll get to more familiar territory. You've heard the European. That's what the European looks like at the same time frame. The GFS, more of the same. So there's a sharp cutoff. It's going to be a huge difference between Alexandria, Louisiana versus Lafayette, Louisiana, where Alexandria may only get, less than an inch. But then Lafayette, Louisiana could see several inches of snow. And there's going to be a bullseye on exactly where the jackpot zone is going to be located. And I think that's going to be pretty much into central Louisiana, just south of Alexandria, right along I-10 almost, it looks like. So that's very crazy to say because you never think of winter weather affecting this far south in the country. Let's just take a look at what one upper level profile could be like. So we're going to pinpoint here central Louisiana, pretty close to Lafayette. And we're just going to show on what, if we were to launch a weather balloon, what that would look like as it goes up into the atmosphere. And what you see here is the green, that's a dew point. The red, that is going to be your temperature profile. And where the green and red lines are very far apart, that tells us the atmosphere is very dry. Meanwhile, as those lines come together, that tells us we've got almost 100% humidity. And of course, you need moisture for precipitation to happen. But what you notice is as the temperature profile goes up, it goes off to the left, and that means we're getting colder as we get higher and higher into the atmosphere. But then, getting closer to the 850 mark, which is about 5,000 feet above the surface, you see that red starts to bend back to the right. So that's that warmer air trying to build its way in to the mid layers of the atmosphere, or the low to mid layers of the atmosphere, and that's why there's potential that sleet could mix in, especially the farther south that you are located into Louisiana. But that's just one perspective. Let's go over to max now. These are the totals on what some of the forecast models are spelling out. And once again, the jackpot zone right over Lafayette, Louisiana, Interstate 10, this is according to the NAM. This is trying to produce, I think it's a little too much, but this is trying to show 10, 11 inches of snow for Lafayette. Is that going to happen? I think the chance of that's fairly low, but let's look at some other information. And once again, look at the difference between Alexandria and Lafayette. That's not a far drive at all. That's about an hour distance drive. Looking at the European, the total is much lower compared to the NAM. We've got a total of about 6 to 8 inches, pretty close to Lafayette. Again, Alexandria right on the line, but that snow band goes all the way to the Florida Panhandle and very close to Jacksonville. And then here's one last model, the GFS, which shows the bullseye pretty much over Lake Charles, Lafayette, Alexandria. Again, once on the gradient, very sharp gradient, and maybe even some higher totals into the Florida Panhandle. So that's just some of the information we're looking at. But as I told you at the top of the show, meteorologists don't just look at these models. We look at what's known as ensembles. And I'll have everything you need to know about what an ensemble is and how it all comes together coming up next. Welcome back to WeatherWise. Earlier this year, we talked about how a weather model all comes together. Well, now we're going to get a little more deeper into what happens in the meteorology world and what meteorologists look at on a day-to-day basis. It's not just one weather model run we look at, it's other runs, and that's all associated with what are known as ensembles. So when a weather model is built using advanced mathematical equations, not going to show you that, supercomputers figure everything out, and it comes up with one perfect run of a model. It can be the GFS, it can be the European, it can be the HER. And this perfect model is known as the deterministic run. What does that mean? That means this model takes everything into account and pretty much says everything that it's taking in as it initializes is correct. The air temperature over Colorado, maybe the water temperature over the Pacific Ocean, other soil moisture content across the country. It's just saying this is all the correct solution at this time, and therefore this is what will be produced from that weather model. The problem is it's not going to be perfect. No model is perfect. Perfection is impossible, and that's due to we cannot get data from all across the world, from every point across the world. We break down the world in a little grid, and that can be a 1 kilometer grid by 1 kilometer grid, but usually it's larger grids when you get into these longer range models like the GFS and European. So with those grid sizes, there's going to be errors, and those errors add up the farther that you go out in time. So therefore, we have what's known as ensemble members for the GFS, for the European. And this thought process of ensembles basically takes into account the normal equation, but makes slight adjustments to some of the data. And it's very slight adjustment. But those slight adjustments that happen within each of these ensemble members will reflect as big differences in the long-range forecast. So I know that's a lot to say, but let's take a look at Storm Track 11 because I've got the GFS ensemble members pulled up. And once again, this is Monday afternoon. This is for going into the next 6 to 10 days. So this is going to be the ensemble members for the next 6 to 10 days. Looks like I'm going to have to refresh my website here, so just give me 1 second on that, and we will get to the ensembles for the next 6 to 10 days, looking at the accumulated snowfall for Texas and the South. So this goes all the way until, we'll just round it off here, until about Friday, let's say Thursday evening. So when you look at this, these are snowfall totals that are being produced by each individual ensemble member within the GFS. So we're making those slight tweaks using the GFS model to produce a varying amount of what we're looking at with snowfall totals. But as a meteorologist, I'm going to look at what is the trend. You have to look closely, but there are differences. E1, Ensemble 1, shows definite snow over Louisiana, and pretty much all of them show snow over Louisiana. This is the European, by the way, not the GFS. I apologize for that. So this is the European model, and you can see that it all shows pretty much a bullseye. High expectation, it's going to snow in Louisiana as we go into Tuesday and Wednesday. But the bullseye or jackpot zone does vary. You look at E21, it's saying the bullseye is south of New Orleans. That is in the lower left-hand corner. And then you look at E1 in the upper left-hand corner. It doesn't have that bullseye compared to E21. So as a meteorologist, I'm going to look at where the consensus is. And we can break it down even more, taking this information and then using the mean of this information. And when we look at that, you get something like this. This is the European ensemble mean. And it shows potential of the high snowfall, once again, I-10, right through Lafayette, and pretty close to New Orleans. So as a meteorologist, I'm going to say the likelihood there's going to be accumulating snowfall is pretty high over that part of Louisiana. Meanwhile, it really drops off once you get north of Lafayette. Shreveport, a few flurries possible. Those totals really ramp up the closer that you are to New Orleans, Morgan City, Lafayette, Louisiana, Lake Charles, Louisiana. And another way we could show this is all these tools that we use as meteorologists. This is a snowfall probability of 3 inches. And boom, once again, bullseye right over East Texas, Louisiana. That's a probability according to the European model that we will have 3 inches of snow, and the probability is over 90%. So that's very high confidence in there's going to be snow happening, and most likely it's going to be 3 inches at least for South Louisiana. Is that perfect? Absolutely not. It's not going to be perfect because there are some biases with some models. Maybe the European is not taking into account how much warm air is going to enter from the Gulf of Mexico and change the snow potentially over to sleet. Therefore, that model would be wrong. And the meteorologist also has to take that into account. Models aren't perfect. The atmosphere is not going to follow the rules necessarily. So your meteorology certainly has to play a part on what you are thinking when it comes to a winter storm. Let's go back over to Max 1 now, because the European has 51 ensemble members. The GFS has 30, the Canadian has 20, and the high resolution rapid refresh model, which really hones into more mesoscale, smaller systems, squall lines, supercells. The data is 48 hours, so it's like a 2-day data out versus the longer range models, the Canadian GFS, the European, that go out 10 to almost 15 days. So the HER is going to be more useful for nowcasting and for forecasting over the next day or so, versus the other models, you can continue to use that. But when we're looking at a winter storm 7 to 10 days away, we're not going to look at the deterministic runs. You may see those posted on social media, and that gets a lot of attention. But true meteorologists are going to go with more of the ensembles and the trends for that. So that is a brief discussion on what an ensemble is. We might get more into that if we have more winter storms here in Arkansas. We have a long ways to go before winter is all over. We're going to switch things here going into the final segment of Weatherwise. We're not going to talk about weather. We're going to be talking about what's happening in the night sky to close out the month of January. Get those telescopes out and binoculars. I'll have an update. We'll close out Weatherwise here with a look at the night sky, which features some pretty cool celestial events happening. We've got an alignment of the planets, and that basically means when you look at night, you can see all the planets at once instead of waiting for one planet for 1 hour and then maybe later that night another planet rises. No, you can check this out. Happens right after sunset. And when you look off to the west, you probably have seen a bright object in the sky that gets your attention. Is that a plane? Is that a star? What's the deal? It's actually the planet Venus. Venus is known as the evening star or the morning star because you never see Venus past 10 o'clock for the most part. It sets. Now, next to Venus, there is Saturn. And Saturn is going to be much dimmer, but you still can't miss it. If you have a telescope, you want to use that telescope and check out maybe the rings of Saturn. And then if you continue to have a telescope or binoculars, you look off to the left-hand part of the sky, going from the western part of the sky more towards the south and southwest, and you'll see a brighter object, brighter than Saturn, but still dimmer than Venus, and that will be the planet Jupiter. If you have binoculars, you should be able to see maybe a couple moons around Jupiter. And that's just basically, you'll see the dot of Jupiter, and then you'll see a couple other dots pretty close to it. And actually, you can get a telescope from your local public library. I know that have a program here in Arkansas that you can actually rent out a telescope if you're interested in that. Then getting into the eastern part of the sky, and this happens between 6 o'clock until about 8:30 in the evening. That's because by 8:30, Venus gets pretty low and it sets most likely by 8:45 or 9. But as the evening progresses along, Mars will get higher into the sky, and Mars is also pretty bright than what it normally shows. And you can't miss that either, because it'll look like a rust orange color, maybe a little bit of a reddish color for some of you, but that is very easy to spot. Now, winter weather constellations, Orion, all you have to do is look for those 3 rows of stars, or a row of 3 stars. And then if you have binoculars, you want to look just past that row of 3 stars, and you'll see another little row. Look through your binoculars and you can actually see a birthplace of stars, and that's known as a nebula. It's just like an orange glow for the most part. That is known as Orion's Nebula, something really cool to check out if you want to get a little more advanced with astronomy. And I'll give you more astronomy ideas and tips as we go along over the next episodes, if there's something cool to check out. I know somebody mentioned this. What are we looking at with meteor showers for 2025? Because 2024, the Geminids were kind of a washout thanks to the moon phase being too much on the near full side. So here's the meteor showers. And I love meteor showers. I grew up watching meteor showers, so I know which ones to really get excited for and take the time to take a vehicle out and set up for the night and watch the stars for a few hours. 2025, unfortunately, doesn't hold much promise. Here's the big ones. The Lyrids, the Eta Aquarids, you know, even in really dark areas, you may see 10 to 20, but here in the metro, the suburbs, 5 to 10 if you're lucky. That's per hour. It's most likely less than that. The Southern Delta Aquariids, 0 to 5, really no big deal. You see the moon phases here. And for the most part, the real good ones, like the Perseids, which are usually fantastic for August, unfortunately, it's going to be pretty close to almost a full moon. So therefore, instead of 50 to 100 meteors per hour that you may see out in the country, I had to drop it 10 to 25. And the Geminids also, unfortunately, the moon is pretty close to being full, and that is going to be about 10 to 20 meteors per hour. So 2025, I'm almost saying skip every meteor shower. Unless you're a diehard, unless you've never seen a meteor before, then you can certainly try your luck. You might see a bright one. You may get lucky. And if you do see just one fireball, that can stick with you for a long time. It's a cool thing to see when the fireball just lasts for a few seconds and it lights up the sky, hey, maybe even cast shadows. That's a really neat thing to see. I've seen that before. And that was in Maryland when I was actually sledding out at night. There was a full moon, and that meteor went right above us. And as the meteor was going above us, you have to think about how the light was working. The shadows shifted because that meteor was going one direction, and it produced that light, and the shadows made their way almost like a counterclockwise circulation. That was a pretty surreal experience, but something I will certainly cherish for probably the rest of my life, because that was something that just burned in my memory as a kid. Well, thank you for tuning in to Weatherwise. I'm meteorologist Nathan Scott. As always, I'm looking for your ideas. If you have any ideas on what topics you want me to cover, if you have any really cool weather pictures, or maybe you have a picture of something that happened and you're like, hey, what caused that? I know there's something known as ice castles that you may have seen over the past couple weeks with these cold temperatures. I'll be talking about that in future episodes, but you can always contact me through email, nscott@thv11.com. Also, don't forget to check out my Facebook page and X platforms. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Weatherwise. Once again, I'm meteorologist Nathan Scott. Have a great day.